So while I was in surgery and having an existential crisis and thinking that I was trapped, I met some other attendings who transitioned into different career paths and switched residencies. And their sharing of their stories really helped me to step back and give myself permission to consider pivoting. And that's why I share my story so freely, is because I hope in it you will be able to give yourself permission to do what you need to do for what's best for you from a place of compassion, curiosity, without judgment, to release yourself from the guilt and shame, to release yourself from those feelings of being trapped that for me became life threatening. Hey there, welcome back to A Life True to You, or welcome to the channel if you're new here. My name is Jillian Riggert, and this video is going to be about normalization of career transitions, giving ourselves permission to pivot. I'm going to share my story and hopes that anyone that is stuck with trying to make a decision and feeling like they're trapped, or feeling like they will feel guilt or shame for even considering some sort of transition in their career, that they can relieve themselves of the guilt and shame and free themselves to really create the life that's true to them. This conversation is important for me to provide because initially I was on track to become a military oromaxillofacial surgeon, and I thought that my worth and value were tied to that career. So when I considered during training that this may not be the best career path for me, and I was critically unwell with a life-threatening illness, I thought that quitting would translate to complete failure and that I would be so ashamed and guilty that I would rather take my own life. At the time, I did not provide myself permission to pivot. So I waited until I was so unwell that it could justify my decision to depart rather than claim that I was going to transition from an empowered position. I went to a new path in order to get away from things that weren't working rather than stopping, identifying what was happening, what was going on, and empowering myself to really take a very intentional next step towards a career that was not only good for me, but also taking care of myself. So it all worked out. I ended up in a residency that was a good fit, that ended up kind of cultivating this career that I have today. But if I were to go back, there are things that I would do differently. And that is where these messages come from today. So I can help support you wherever you are at and see what resonates, what doesn't. Share down below where you're at, where your stuck points are. That will help me understand what type of content might be supportive of you on your journey and could be helpful. If any questions develop along the way, please share those down below. And if you haven't already, make sure to smash that subscribe button. I would love to see you around this community, and your support really helps me know that this content is helpful. I'm going to try to be a little bit concise so that you can ask questions where you want, but I don't really feel like rambling on just because every time I try to film this, I think I'm trying to give you too many details, and you let me know what questions you have along the way. So for many of us, we start really thinking about our careers in undergrad. So in undergrad, I majored in biology with a minor in biochemistry. I was really interested in psychology, but that wasn't completely supported by a family member of mine whose opinion at the time I really cared about. And so I pursued dentistry, which combined my passion for science as well as my desire to help people, and from an indirect way, helped me to utilize my interests in psychology because I believe that our smile really impacts our psychosocial well-being. And I really wanted to help patients with their confidence one smile at a time. So from undergrad, I did a fast track program, meaning that I did 3 years of undergrad and then my first year of dental school transferred back to be my fourth year of undergrad. So I skipped 1 year of undergrad to go into dental school, which also impacted my decision back then. And I really enjoyed aspects of dentistry, primarily the 3-hour appointments I got with my lovely patients. And I know some of you still follow me, so hello, all were so very lovely. And the best thing that I had was the opportunity to hear their stories. The dentistry part was anxiety provoking, but I did love working with my hands. I thought that I would really value more increased medical training because if you're not familiar with dentistry, typically in dental school, we treat patients who are not that medically complex. So that doesn't always translate into the real world setting. The 3 hour appointments definitely don't translate into the real world setting for the type of procedures that we were doing. And when thinking about where I'd be most proud of myself, it was pursued the career that I thought was the hardest and that I would feel like a total badass if I pursued. So I pursued oral maxillofacial surgery with great intentions. I really had this vision to do cleft lip and palate procedures and to help individuals who are born with congenital malformations. I was interested in pathology, so I thought I could support people who came in with tumors and potentially cancer or benign tumors, and also was interested in supporting patients who maybe had a traumatic injury that really impacted their identity to repair that, to really give them back their quality of life and their psychosocial well-being. So I pursued oral maxillofacial surgery with great intentions. I also pursued the military with deep passion, as I had wanted to be in the military for most of my life. There was something about being around individuals in the military that held them to high standards that really catered to my interests. So I was so enthusiastic about pursuing the Air Force oral maxillofacial surgery role. And it was the best day of my life when I was selected by the Air Force to pursue a 6-year program in oral maxillofacial surgery. And if you're not familiar, there's 4-year programs in oral maxillofacial surgery, and there's 6 years. And the difference is that in the 6-year programs, you pursue your MD as well as complete your surgical training. So I knew for sure that pursuing the medical training component was very important to me. So I only wanted 6-year training positions. And again, I felt like it was the best day of my life when the Air Force said, "You are selected. You're going to be joining the Air Force, and you are going to be well on your way to becoming an Air Force oral and maxillofacial surgeon." I can feel in my heart how excited I was and the grief because I know where my plans led. So I'll take a moment to feel that. So in 2013, I graduated from dental school and I commissioned into the Air Force, and I was so, so proud. And the Air Force had most of us do 1 year of being an active duty Air Force member before we went into residency. So that's what I did. I did officer training, and then I was a staff dentist for a little under a year before I started my civilian program in oral maxillofacial surgery. And the reason I went into a civilian program is because the Air Force at the time had 4-year programs, and they sponsored me to go through the match and pursue a civilian oral maxillofacial surgery program that was the 6-year program. So after just under a year, after being a general dentist on an Air Force base, I went to my civilian program, which I absolutely loved the program. I loved the location, but I had so much doubt and I couldn't gain clarity on whether the doubt was self-doubt. I hear about it a lot now, but I didn't then, about having those imposter thoughts, the self-doubt. I thought it was just me. I thought I was the only one who couldn't cut it. And I was feeling really depressed after long nights on call, especially after the high anxiety. Going from dental school to oral surgery is quite a jump in terms of the stress level and your responsibility. And I didn't have enough coping skills at the time, and I didn't really have any support, especially in the location that I was at, to gain help with, just daily tasks. So I was responsible for my life and for training, and, it's me, and can be really helpful during training to have some support system near yourself, which I learned the hard way, I think. So while I was in training, I started to doubt whether the road I was on was the path for me. Reflecting back, I wish I had a coach back then to help me to kind of dissect what aspects of it weren't working. Was it my own confidence? I wish I knew I wasn't alone. I wish I knew at the time that it wasn't just me who got depressed while sleep deprived, who felt that they didn't belong there because they were full of self-doubt, who just needed sleep and not to feel guilty about it. I wish I knew back then that self-compassion was at the core of mental toughness and that this berating and this culture of beating ourselves down and beating each other's down in hopes they'll build up stronger is bull poo-poo. I wish I would have known that then. And if you don't know it yet, I hope we may learn it together now to fully embody it now. The whole being our own worst critic doesn't ultimately lead to showing up as our best self or performing better. When we provide ourselves with self-compassion, Brene Brown found that that's at the core of mental toughness. And if we detach our worth from our outcomes, we can often perform better. I can create tons of videos on that type of content. If you want, let me know down below. But back to these career transitions. So when I was in oral surgery and I didn't know if that was the path for me and I was feeling like I was trapped, I really wish then I had someone to partner with that was a coach and that could really help me to empower myself to see what I wanted. I did go to therapy, but here's how that impacted me in a way that I wish I was seeing both a therapist and a coach, because it could have helped balance what ultimately I did, and I'll explain it. So when I went to therapy, I was hyper fixated on the diagnoses, the labels, the mental health issues, what's wrong with me. So I focused on how I was broken and how I was unworthy. Maybe I wasn't even in a right place for coaching at the time, but here's how coaching later in my life impacted me in a way that therapy hadn't yet gotten me to be able to do, was that coaching helped me focus on my strengths, helped me see what was contributing to my weaknesses and my downfalls and areas where I was depressed and having thoughts that were making myself feel worse. But it really empowered me to say what's best for me and where are my strengths without pathologizing the weaknesses. So I am, eventually you'll hear about it, in a master's in marriage and family therapy. I was going to pursue psychiatry. So this isn't against those modalities. I'm just thinking about the differences in how coaching and the mindset of coaching and empowerment and not focusing on diagnosing and pathologizing things really impacted me more positively and helped me to move forward. And again, this is hindsight bias because it's also impacted by the fact I started coaching when I was able to sleep and nourish myself. So just look at different types of support that might be available to you and see what is the best fit for you. And also you can do coaching and therapy at the same time. I often recommend to most of my coaching clients that a lot comes up in coaching that it might be best to also dissect a little bit deeper from a therapeutic model. So while I was in surgery and having an existential crisis and thinking that I was trapped, I met some other attendings who transitioned into different career paths and switched residencies. And their sharing of their stories really helped me to step back and give myself permission to consider pivoting. And that's why I share my story so freely, is because I hope in it you will be able to give yourself permission to do what you need to do for what's best for you, from a place of compassion, curiosity, without judgment, to release yourself from the guilt and shame, to release yourself from those feelings of being trapped that for me became life-threatening. I do not want that for anyone else. And if you're there, I see you, and I'm here to fully support you and to figure out what resources that you might need in order to help you navigate where you're at right now. So fast forward, eventually I would develop a life-threatening level of anorexia where I was inpatient. And when I sought support for that condition, I was eventually medically discharged from the military. And because I thought I was the burden and something was wrong with me, when I went for my appeal, I was so deflated that I didn't show up as the advocate I wanted to be to save my career. I went to appeal the decision to be medically discharged in the military, especially after my command had recommended that I get retained because I had been performing well in professionally speaking while almost dying from anorexia. Yes, it's ironic, but also I'm sure many people who are listening can relate that we can sacrifice ourselves to the point where we're nearly dying, but yet performing well, getting the A plus pluses, right? But I was performing well from a subjective standpoint of the feedback that I was receiving, both from a residency standpoint, medical school standpoint, and military standpoint. But when I got to my Air Force appeal, I was being evaluated by a trauma surgeon, was on the other side of that appeal. And because I thought I would be worthless if I left surgery, I heard the words he said, the way he said them to me, kind of validating that you're kind of worthless to the Air Force if you leave this, even though there was another officer there who said, but she's interested in psychiatry, so we should retain her. I had already fallen to the belief that something was very wrong with me and that, yeah, sure, I should be kicked out because something is completely wrong with me. And I let go of this lifelong dream I had to be in the military and to make that my career. So when people are in this, when they think they're a burden, when they think that they are the weak link, it's so important to get support because often we're having thought errors. We are thinking it's just us. And in sharing my story, I have heard so many who resonate. And though I recommend sharing our story when it's appropriate for us, I also held on in guilt and shame to my story in secret for so long, thinking people would judge me, that when I released it, I was pleasantly surprised to know that not only were people not judging me, but it brought a whole bunch of people into my life who truly see me and support me. So that's to advocate, recommend, to share your story at your pace, and also from an experience of mine that hiding in secrecy, in guilt, and shame can often be released when we find the space where we are safe to share parts of our story where it will be heard with compassion, without judgment. So if you're holding on to something because you're embarrassed, you're ashamed, consider where might it be appropriate to share. It might start in a very private setting with a therapist that you trust, a friend that you trust, a family member that you trust, your dog, your cat, your fish, releasing it from inside of ourselves, seeing it from a place, curiosity, compassion without judgment can reduce that guilt and shame that is increasing our own suffering. So I was medically discharged from the military and I held on to my oral surgery resignation until about a day or two before the start of a new residency that I had solidified, which is oral medicine. At that transitional point, holding on to oral surgery as long as I could and starting a new residency without giving myself time reflects that I was not yet ready to sit with the who am I without this career. Also, with an illness that can become an identity, I was faced with if I don't release part of this identity, I'm going to die. And I also had lost people close to me along my training journey. One being my ex-boyfriend, who had called me a couple days before he passed away, and I didn't answer because I was too busy being tired from residency. I felt so selfish. I felt like my values were so misaligned. My co-resident, who passed away day before our medical school graduation, and my Air Force commander, who was overseeing my accountability during a medical leave, who was full of life, who passed away when he was killed in a car accident on the way to work. So I wasn't ready to face survivor's guilt, to face the shame and the guilt of quitting a residency, to face the emptiness of the who am I without this career that I thought was essential in order to prove my worth and value to the world. So I threw myself into overwork, which was residency attempt number 2, oral medicine. So I started oral medicine residency in a very exhausted state. According to my program director, he thinks I did fine. He thinks I did well. He was a huge supporter. Could have done better had I been rested. Had I allowed myself to pause, had I changed those self-critical beliefs, thinking I had to learn it all, had I changed those self-critical beliefs, believing I had to know it all before I learned it, had I had a beginner's mind, had I allowed myself the discomfort of growth that is learning and not feel that I had to prove myself by knowing it all again before I learned it. We wouldn't be in residency if we knew it all. Medicine is a lifelong journey. Dentistry is a lifelong journey. Learning about ourselves is a lifelong journey. Why do we put so much pressure on ourselves to know it all? What does it even mean to know it all? As a clinician and researcher, I know quite well we're continuously learning and adapting what we think we knew, modifying it with new evidence that either validates or disproves what we previously believed. So where is all this pressure coming from to know it all before we learned it, or know it all, period? I wish I would have given myself the opportunity to embrace the growth and not judged myself for not having all the answers. How do you relate? So I successfully completed oral medicine. I fell in love with serving patients with head and neck cancer because I felt that was the patient population I could offer the most support and value. Patients with head and neck cancer have one of the highest suicide rates. Head and neck cancer greatly impacts your psychosocial, psychospiritual well-being. So I really gravitated towards these patients. My first year as an attending, I was in hospital dentistry and it was neighbored by oral maxillofacial surgery. That was a lot tougher than I thought it was going to be emotionally, to be an attending and witness the individuals who I would have graduated with be the chiefs in their residency. During this time, COVID hit. And the position that I had accepted turned out to be a position that was changed back to the position I had declined, meaning that I was seeking an attending role that was suited for my areas of interest, and I was offered that verbally. But once I got there, it changed back to a position that wasn't a good fit for me or the clinic's needs. So that position lasted a year, also impacted by a lot of the unknowns and uncertainties from COVID. And what I learned from it was that I really wanted to focus on patients with head and neck cancer, that I was not interested in expanding and going back to my skills in general dentistry, and that I really needed to cultivate a career that catered to both my interests and my needs, meaning that the surgical careers where there's a lot of uncertainty with when your OR case will go, there's call when you don't know what's going to come in. That can be fine for some people. For me, at the time where I was with my own wellness, I needed stability. I needed to prioritize my health, or else I wouldn't be here. In 2021, I hit another life-threatening level of anorexia. And I think it's because I just kept trying to push and push and push without stopping, without questioning what was happening. What do I really want? What do I really need? So in 2021, I was at a point where I thought, I can't do this anymore. I can't continue the way I'm continuing. I was quite desperate, actually, and this desperation led me to take more risks. The fact that I was in a life-threatening state, admittedly, provided me the opportunity to take more risks because I thought I had nothing to lose. I don't want you to have to be in that state before making a decision because it comes out of desperation and not of empowerment. But at the time, I thought I'm not going back inpatient for anorexia because that was not a pleasant experience, nor was it sustainably healing for me, though it did save my life. So I am not stating that people who are in a position should avoid inpatient treatment for anorexia. But at that time, I was not in a place where I was going to accept admission for the state I was in with anorexia. So I thought, what haven't I tried before? And I was steered towards Dr. Sunny Smith's Empowering Women Physicians group, which is her group based off of her coaching program. And I learned about coaching. So what the heck is coaching? Especially what the heck is life coaching? I had a lot of beliefs about it. My family had a lot of beliefs about it, a lot of judgments that led me to feel sick inside. And also, I was so curious that I thought, heck, I got to give this a try. I was looking into the program that a lot of people did, and it didn't resonate with me until somebody put Martha Beck's Wayfinder Life Coach training up. And I looked at the program and I read Martha Beck's book, The Way of Integrity, Finding the Path to Your True Self. This was a transformational book for me that was the beginning of me reclaiming my own life. Her story resonated with me. If you haven't read that book, I do recommend it, especially if you're in the state of who am I? What am I doing with my life? Why do I feel so bad? So I read that book and I kept landing on Martha Beck's Wayfinder Life Coach training. I wasn't doing it to become a life coach. I was doing it to save my life. I joined that life coach training when I was between jobs, when I thought I was going to be on the streets, and I thought I might be dead. So I thought I got nothing to lose. And I was fortunate that at the same time, I talked to my oral medicine community and said, I'm looking for a job. And when I had realized my first job out of residency wasn't a good fit, I was also really embarrassed. But I reached out to my oral medicine community, who was so very helpful in helping me to validate that the first job outside of residency, a lot of people find it's not a great fit, and they helped me consider options. So the chair of my oral medicine residency actually sent me an email. He was forwarded from a radiation oncologist at the hospital where I trained for oral medicine residency. And it was of a tweet from another radiation oncologist who was recruiting for an early career dental specialist to join the radiation oncology team that were devoted to improving patients' quality of life who were living with head and neck cancer post-radiation therapy by reducing the symptoms and the side effects of radiation therapy, which was my niche, my interest, my focus. I love research. It seemed like a match made in heaven. I didn't have Twitter at the time, so I got Twitter. I found that post. I said, me. And I was very fortunate that this radiation oncologist interviewed me the next day, and we were full speed ahead applying for an NIH grant that would allow me to join his team and move from Michigan to Texas to start over once again. So ultimately, and I'm going to skip a whole bunch of details in between, but ultimately, I do join the radiation oncology team at MD Anderson Cancer Center. I'm elated because the research focus of improving patients' quality of life, especially those living with head and neck cancer after radiation therapy, is my passion. And while I was at MD Anderson, they had a burnout committee meeting. And after the burnout committee meeting, which I attended, the chair said, reach out with any questions. And I reached out to say, hey, is there a role for coaching for us? Because I had learned from Empowering Women Physicians that coaching was very beneficial for individuals who were navigating burnout. Fortunate for me, the chair was a huge advocate for coaching. And despite that I hadn't yet started my coaching program, I already had thought, how am I going to utilize this coaching to serve others and myself? That chair put me in touch with an individual who's part of the Leadership Institute at MD Anderson. And MD Anderson actually has internal coaches, and they train them in order to be coaches for all the employees at MD Anderson. I was very fortunate that when I met with the individual from the Leadership Institute, there was a spot in their coaching training, which is Coach Rice. So MD Anderson affiliates with Rice University to train their coaches through Coach Rice, which is an executive coaching program. And so there I was. I was a research fellow in radiation oncology, and I was an internal coach at MD Anderson, focusing on the patient population that I love. I could never have crafted that when I was in oral surgery, thinking that I was stuck and trapped in a career. And I am 1 week away from finish my master coach training with Martha Beck. I obtained my certification as a chief wellness officer to really focus on wellness of the individual and the impacts of this system, because we know that burnout is not an individual problem, that burnout isn't burnout only, and that many people are experiencing moral injury from working in systems that have them to abandon themselves and also their core values and their moral values. So where does that leave me today? Today, I am an oral medicine specialist. I am a cancer researcher, particularly focused on improving the psychospiritual and psychosocial well-being of patients and their caregivers who are impacted by cancer, particularly head and neck cancer. I am a coach for healthcare professionals, mostly physicians, some dentists, and other healthcare professionals. I am pursuing a master's in marriage and family therapy with interest in psycho-oncology. I just finished Memorial Sloan Kettering's meaning-centered psychotherapy, which I am so stoked about because that really solidified the trajectory of where I want to take my career. And I am invested in helping people to live a life true to themselves, because it nearly cost me my life and definitely increased my own suffering when I was living out of alignment. And I love to build community. So if this community resonates with you, please make sure to subscribe, to share it with anyone else who may benefit. Please share with me your story, your questions, your insights, your reflections down in the comments below. Share with me where you're at. What are your next steps? And what are you going to do today to live a life that's true to you? And what obstacles do you think are holding you back? Till next time, thanks for being here.